I'm really, really excited to share some thoughts about designing for emergence. Kind of for me, an evolution of design for all of us, and share some ways that I'm excited about seeing this happen in the world. In the interest of kind of drumming up a bit of business for you, Josh, I thought I'd throw up a Twitter handle. Like, if you guys want any of the specific examples or stories that I tell you, just reach out to me through Twitter. I'll send them all across to you. It's all pretty open, but I'm going to skim through a few topics. So let's start with design. I mean, many of you might know actually Torsten Ryle at Natural Motion, awesome guy. And we were having a conversation not long ago about what great design is. And one of the things we concluded is great design, our challenge as designers, if we the aim is to kind of build a hill and the peak of it is great customer experience, user experience, our job of designers is to drop the product on the top of that hill. And A/B testing doesn't necessarily do that. Kind of A/B testing or split testing, whatever you want to call it, it enables us to climb up the same hill, but the designer's job is to drop right on there. And one of the things I find fascinating at the moment is as the world gets more complex and it changes, it's harder and harder to drop at the top of that hill, to come up with the perfect design, to get it complete and get it out there. And part of the reason for that is the world is changing. And so one of the things it sort of led us to believe at IDEO, and something I'm really passionate about, is how does the craft of design change in that really sort of high flux world that's changing, where user behavior changes all the time? Is actually our job now more to design for emergence, to kind of design a system where the new hills emerge themselves and then we can jump onto them. So I'd love to share some thoughts of that. How can we actually create with our products almost Petri dishes to see what will grow, what behaviors, what user behaviors might grow on top of them? So I'm going to share specifically 4 ways. And by the way, I thought this event is going to be like a font battle. So I'm going in that mine are actually fairly weak to give you guys good opportunity to. But I'm going to dive into 4 ways that we can all design for emergence. Now, the first one for me, I'm really excited about, is accelerating evolution. In the past, partly because processing costs, the cost of developing product was so high, we kind of had to be right. And we talked about linear development, the idea that you put something out there and you iterate it and you come up with something else. The only reason that sort of scientific method, hypothesis, come up with an idea and put it out there was essential is it was too expensive to try everything. And one of the things I'm really interested about is that idea of parallel evolution, trying everything. So in 1991, Linus Torvalds, the father of Linux, as you all know, sent out this message. This message is beautiful to me because he had low expectations. He was scratching his own itch. He didn't expect it to be anything big. You see it there. But in 1991, he released the kernel, and what happened since was a proliferation of product. That proliferation, that parallel development accelerates evolution. You could never do this in a serial way. You have to develop it in parallel. Now, for most of us, open source kind of isn't an option. It's interesting whether that will change in the future, but we don't tend to build our products completely open source. And I think one of the ways that we can actually start to design for this specific behavior is through the creative use of APIs. I'm actually really excited to hear from these guys, their views on it. Now, what many people don't actually remember is initially, these mashups, there were sort of 2 or 3 that were really successful. One around crime in Chicago, and then this one, housing maps, which is still up. It was reverse engineered. There was no Google Maps API at the time, but Google was smart. They saw that development. They released an API, which gives us all incredible power. And it's now the most widely used API on the web. There's 350,000 websites that use Google Maps. They're almost parallel evolving the different versions. They've created a system with their API where they're distributing creativity. It's an interesting idea. We're basically tapping in not the sort of wisdom of the crowd, but the craft of the crowd, the creativity. So my first thought is actually, can we collectively accelerate evolution by opening it up to more? And some of the sort of applications, this one I put in there because I'm just wondering if someone can pronounce that URL and that name. It's so wrong. but you can figure out what that is yourself. So that's a pretty frivolous use of it. But there's some really important uses of Google Maps, like Ushahidi, which you all know will be an unbelievable example. Unbelievably important. So the first one for me is, can we, as designers, start to actually empower everyone else to design the use, to create their own hills for us to jump onto? Like, we heard a lot in the past that reciprocal links, you occasionally hear APIs are the new reciprocal link. It's kind of limiting. It's a boring use of them. It just means more traffic. What if APIs can be a way of actually seeing this accelerated evolution, this parallel evolution? So the first one for me, and the sort of challenge for you guys, is what can you open up for external development? What can you let people see into to see the other hills flourish, to see them grow? Now, the next thing in that system, if you think about nature as a metaphor, one of the lovely things we see is we see a proliferation in nature. We see people, species try every variant. We understand that. But importantly, there's some constraints in the system. So my next sort of challenge for you guys is, what constraints are you putting in your product? Because in an environment where you want this creativity to spread and you want distributed evolution, probably the constraints that you put in are more important than your initial ideas, because they're going to shape the direction of the platform. They're going to shape where it's going specifically. So an example I like to use of this is around the sort of development of, I call them mobile phones, which I'm sure you'll all think is very quaint. But mobile phones, the development, if you think about how they evolved over time, they were becoming more of a constraint. The keys were becoming more sort of prescriptive. They were forcing us as humans into a specific type of behavior. They were therefore limiting the way that they could proliferate. We understand the sort of operating system constraints as well. And one of the reasons iOS and the iPad and the iPhone have done so well, which people don't really acknowledge, is they're like blank canvases. They've done an unbelievable job of tapping into all of our creativity. They didn't expect to release the development kit initially. They were just smart. Just like Google was smart to open up its API, Apple was smart to open up its dev kit. They realized that they couldn't sort of own that creativity themselves. But they do introduce some constraints. And this slide, I suspect, the next slide will kind of release either a boo with half of the people and a cheer with the other half. But we as designers, we often sort of whinge about this one, the UX rules, but I think they're important. I think actually they gave a level of predictability to sort of app development that made them feel natural to us. So when someone comes up with a spirit level or a payment system, the behavior makes sense. So my next challenge for you guys is actually, what constraints do you have in your products? Spend time designing the constraints, thinking about how it's limiting the development, the accelerated evolution. So the third one, which it's more general, but I think it's interesting. In this world where you get emergence and you have sort of the unexpected happen, the opportunities bubble up, I think serendipity serendipity as in luck, it favors the connected. And it's obviously connected in terms of people. Like, I love this as sort of evidence of it. So this is a sort of Harvard network that I'm part of because of where I went to college. And the other end here, you can see this is IDEO. So all the IDEO guys love this. Opposite ends, it's somehow sort of filtered it out and pushed it out there. But the interesting thing is there's a latent value in that, bringing eclectic different people together. So some of the things we do, and actually something we've done with OpenIDEO a lot, is we've had events where we deliberately bring the most diverse set of people we can come up with. We don't call them hackathons, because guess what? You just generally get hackers. We call them makeathons, and we bring together really eclectic sets of people. And one of the things we did a challenge recently around cycle safety. And we had a bunch of amazing people come into the studio. We organized it at 72 hours notice. They came in and they started coming up with solutions. This is one of them, actually, which I found inspiring. Someone built out of Arduino overnight a sort of safety light. If you get too close to this bike, it'll give you a frowning face. Just a lovely execution. Other people built apps. The beauty and the value in this group was the diversity that were developing it.
What's going on here?
Well, I've been living with this girl about a year. We're very close. We spend 24/7 together. We're just, we're tight. We're intimate and everything.
How do you know her?
She's my cousin.
So why on earth did I just play that? I genuinely aren't entirely sure. But one of the reasons, and I think it's important for us. Sorry, say that again. Yeah, you don't want that. Don't go there. You don't even know. I don't know where it goes. I'm not brave enough. But one of the things that's interesting to me in this is it was some, like, you look at this and we all think, my God, that probably just made us a little bit dumber. But 30 years ago, there was a guy called Seth Roberts, pretty amazing guy. He's in his 50s now. And he was overweight. He had acne. He had insomnia. He was a miserable dude. And he thought, I'm going to dedicate my life to gathering data about myself and figuring out what makes me happy, what makes me live better. And one of the things he found, which I find really interesting, he found that if he watched half an hour of Talking Heads every morning, he'd be happier for the rest of the day. Now, why the hell am I telling this into a bunch of designers? I think the reason is we need to start designing for data. And it's really difficult to do, justify reasons to actually gather data and collect it wisely. But some interesting, just in the same way as when you connect different diverse people together, when we start connecting different diverse data together, I think value will emerge. Another example, which I always found surprising, is this. Why on earth have I got Pop-Tarts up there? Any ideas? Because it's awesome. Done. No, the reason is Walmart collecting really eclectic sets of data. They looked, and every now and again, Walmart sales would go absolutely ballistic. Why might that be? The reason is, when there's a hurricane warning, everyone thinks they're in big trouble, and this is like the perfect balanced diet. This is the meal you need when it all goes wrong. They combined two weird sets of data and came up with a learning. They came up with a new opportunity. We need to start to design to collect that data in interesting ways. A company I invested in called, which you may know actually, well, I'm sure you'll know, Asa Raskin's company, Massive Health. Amazing guy, amazing business. Asa thinks about crafting product to generate data, and data will unlock those new hills. Data will unlock opportunities to actually make the user experience better. So he released the app, the Eatery. Some of you might have it. I think one of the sort of demonstrations of how you can unlock interesting learnings you can see on this slide. So this is, you can't properly see it, but that's the light moving across, and this is the healthiness of the food. So what you can see is as we go into the US and sunset comes, it all goes red. We basically eat healthily through the day, and then as soon as it's dark, we just eat shit. Like, that's the learning. But this is important because you can design product with this insight from data. Now, the other thing that's interesting for us as designers, in the past, we've generally looked inside our product for the learnings, for the eclectic data. But there's some other ways of doing it. There's some interesting other ways of doing it. And then when you get the data, obviously you can process it now. The cost of processing it is just distributing down. 2 minutes, sorry, okay. Woo. And there's some inspiring stuff. So in the past, if you look at actually processing data and collecting it for insight, there's new products like Wolfram Alpha Pro where you can literally dump data sets in and it'll come up with the insight. And those insights are going to be important for us designing products. We're going to learn from them. We can literally, we've had to have a hypothesis before because it's expensive, but now we dump eclectic data in and we can get insight that will make us build better product, more interesting product. So my third point is, what data actually might you guys start to collect? And then there's a final, probably only a couple of minutes, I hope. Final thing is, how do we as designers grab the opportunities? Like, you guys, I'm sure, feel this. A lot of you are in fast-growing businesses and your time is precious, so you struggle to find the time. The challenge is to grab these opportunities. You need time. You need oxygen to see them emerging and to strike on the opportunity. At Open IDEO, we try and carve out literally half a day a week just to look for the emergent behaviors on the platform. And most of our good ideas are completely led by users. So an example is we started to see this behavior around people creating virtual teams. We're going to release that in 2 weeks as a new feature, just because we started to see it emerge. And we deliberately think of the product as a Petri dish that people will grow these new user behaviors on. We saw people interestingly using it in the classroom, and we've developed toolkits for that application. So we try and find the time, the oxygen. And sometimes they can be really surprising. Those new hills that emerge because we design the right environment can be a surprise. So this one's old. So you remember this, 2006. How many of you actually dumped Mentos into Diet Coke? It's kind of awesome. It's a lot of people. A lot of people were doing it. If you look at Google Trends, this is the search for Coke and Mentos in 2006 when EP Bird released that video. It went absolutely mental. The reason I think it's interesting is there were 10,000 copycat videos within 2 weeks. The sales of Mentos, what do you think it did to them? 20% up. What do you think the difference is now? It stayed at 20%. They saw this opportunity. They contacted EP Bird within a week. The designers had time, the brand in that case, designers had time. They saw the opportunity and they struck. So for you guys, how do you find the time to look at these emergent behaviors? How do you find the time to look at them inside your platform, but also outside your platform? Some ex-IDEOs have built if this then that, which you'll know really well. I look at these and I can't think beyond the fact these are all really interesting new use cases. This is a signal to designers about what people want to do with the product. This connects that idea that we release the API and then we let parallel use cases develop, evolve. And if we look at the recipes on if this then that, it's a great example. So my final one for you guys is actually, are you really watching the behaviors on your products? Are you carving out time for your designers to look for the hills emerging that they can then drop your product straight onto? Thank you so much for your time.
Sweet. Thanks, Tom.